in Sioux City, where I live, there is my local barista. Yeah, Sioux City, represent. There is my local barista is a member of the Yang Gang. Nice. And he talks you up all the time, and I want to know, what is your version, and what do you think? Like, talk to us about the Yang Gang and what it's all about.
Rule number one is you don't talk about Yang Gang. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Actually, rule number one is you always talk about Yang Gang, like your barista. So Yang Gang is just this name that bubbled up for people who support the campaign. And it's just, like as a journalist said, it's just fun to say. It's so fun to say that people have even written songs about it. They're just like the Yang Gang anthem. But it bubbled up. Yeah, there's several songs actually. You can Google that. Well, what the Yang Gang means to me is just people that are embracing a vision of an economy that puts people first and that starts serving our goals and values instead of us all, frankly, like trying to turn ourselves into something that's useful to the marketplace. And so to me, the Yang Gang is just people who believe in humanity first.
I'd like to hear how you're going to pay for it. I know when you were great, you told us how you'd pay for that freedom dividend. And I'd also like to know whether you would, I think most people want to work. You know, we had a WPA, a CCC back in the Depression. There's a lot of just, self-worth about working. And would you combine that with your freedom dividend?
Well, number one was how do you pay for it? And then number two was what do you think about jobs programs like they had in the Depression with the WPP and the Civilian Conservation Corps, I think it was the CCC. So first, in terms of how you pay for it, I was talking about how Amazon paid zero in taxes, Netflix also paid zero in taxes, and so the big winners from artificial intelligence and the new economy are going to be this set of really big tech companies. And so the key is to try and get some of the money back from them and give it to you all. And then you'll spend it, and then you'll make the economy stronger. So if you look at what other countries have already done, every other advanced economy aside from ours already has a value-added tax, which would then give the American public a tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad. And because our economy is up to 20 trillion plus, a value-added tax at even half the European level generates over 800 billion in new revenue. Now, this is the magic. If I give the money out to you all, the owners of this country, you spend it, and then your neighborhood economy grows, and then we get more tax revenue back. The trickle-up economy would actually work, unlike the trickle-down economy, which was total garbage and nonsense. They kind of knew that. It's even an insulting name. Think about it, the trickle-down economy. Anyway, so you get 800 billion from the value-added tax. You get about 400 billion in new tax revenue from economic growth, and then you save hundreds of billions on incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room health care, and other things that we spend hundreds of billions on now, over $1 trillion in the aggregate. And then here's the magic. If we put this money into our hands, what happens is our kids get stronger, they get better nutrition, graduation rates go up, health improves, mental health improves, relationships improve, domestic violence goes down, hospital visits go down. And there was one study that showed that if you were just to alleviate poverty in this country, we would increase GDP by 700 billion just on the basis of having stronger and healthier and more mentally healthy and productive people. So that's the magic of the trickle-up economies. The money doesn't disappear. It's investing in us. It's not left, it's not right, it's forward. And so that's like this is going to be much less expensive. We're going to get a lot of the money back. And I used to run businesses, and when you have a good business, you all the time talk about investing in your people. You say, if I invest in my people, then my organization will get stronger and do better. In the public space, we do the opposite. We're like, do not invest in those people at all if you can help it. And then we just end up paying at the back end when they wind up incarcerated or in our emergency room or in our services. When I was in New Hampshire, I'm very politician-y. When I was in New Hampshire a couple months ago, it was a corrections officer who said we should pay people to stay out of jail because we pay so much when they're in jail. So we have to start treating ourselves the way that good companies treat their people. We need to invest in ourselves, invest in our people.
Yes, my name is Mr. Linga. My coworkers, they are all strong Republicans. But when they saw you and me, I've always been a Democrat. But when they saw you on Ben Shapiro's show, Mr. Tucker Carlson's show, they want to convert to Democrats. I attended Mrs. Elizabeth Warren's rally, and after the rally, we always make a line to get personal pictures. But I noticed when you are in Washington, D.C., it was all about selfies. So while can we, the people here, can we, after this event, make a line and get personal pictures?
I'll go with a second first. I will wait here until every single person here has a selfie who wants one. I'm not going anywhere. Now, that would not be the case if I was in a place like Michigan. I'm kidding. To the first point, I think that Democrats are doing ourselves a huge disservice by declaring certain venues off limits. I mean, how can you win an election if you're not showing up on places like Fox, which, like it or not, that's where millions of Americans get their news. It's like it or not, again, I mean, we have to win a national election. And so, the fact that the DNC said that Fox couldn't host a debate, to me was very counterproductive. What's that? Wow. It's my fans. No. So the fact that I would go on Fox News, to me, it's just introducing myself to Americans. And if we can get more people like your friends to convert to Democrats, then that is how we win.
Hi, Andrew. I'm a huge fan. I drove up here from Kansas City. I'm not an Iowan, so I'm one of those votes that don't count.
I'm kidding. No, thank you for doing that. Thank you.
So Iowa, please make my vote count one day. So I have a question for you. I'm from the tech industry in particular, and I actually drove up here with a friend who's a huge Elizabeth Warren fan, as am I. And I think the biggest understanding from a Democratic stance is how do we pick one? Because we like so many. And so I'm curious from your perspective, knowing that the majority of that money from a universal income is going to come from the added value tax along with a few other ones, Elizabeth Warren's sort of tactic in terms of handling the economy and the tech industry is to go in and implement some pretty strong antitrust laws, which is awesome. But I'm curious how your plan differs. They both come out with a similar outcome, but I'm just curious how your plan differs from that, knowing that me personally is a choice between you and Elizabeth. So if we're trying to decide between those two things, how does your plan kind of differ in terms of how you handle the technology?
Thank you. Such a specific question, which I love. First, let me say that I applaud your taste in candidates because I like Elizabeth Warren a great deal. So her approach towards tech in particular, I felt like it was a little bit of like a set of 20th century approaches to 21st century problems. Because the antitrust laws are very poorly designed for this era, and so it does make sense to try and come up with new tests and measures. But in some of the cases, breaking up the tech companies it wouldn't solve the problem. So I'll give you an example. Facebook and Instagram are very, very popular, and they're among the apps that are causing depression in teenage girls around the country by the data, because teenage girls have these smartphones, teenage boys too, but it's worse for girls. And so if that is a problem you're concerned about, breaking up the corporate ownership of Facebook and Instagram does not actually solve that problem. It's also the case that if you were to break up Amazon into 4 mini Amazons, which is not what she's recommending, that would not magically revive the Main Street economy of various towns. Like, you have to try and look at what the problems you're trying to solve are and go in case by case instead of doing something that, in my opinion, it feels satisfying, but in some cases, it might not be the right solution. One example I use is that none of us wants to use the 4th best navigation app. You know what I mean? Like in the 20th century, you were like, ooh, you should have competition. But in the 21st century economy, there's actually real gains to having one player that has all of the data so that you have like one navigation app you actually trust. You know, like it's a reason why Google has won and we all stopped using Yahoo and Bing and Ask Jeeves and the rest of it. Like, there are actually some benefits to it. And so you don't want to just show up and say, you know what we have to do? We have to turn this into like competition again. Because then you'll probably end up like just in this weird like circular pattern. Because then, given the advantages of data, like there's going to end up being like one winner that consolidates. So what we have to do is we have to look at it and say, look, what are the problems here we're trying to solve? And in some cases, it may include like having these businesses divest parts of themselves, 100%. And I agree with Elizabeth Warren that if you're Amazon, you can't be promoting your Amazon house brand over other companies' goods and then just continuously advantaging yourself and disadvantaging them. Like, I agree. And I think Elizabeth Warren's overall values and spirit and vision are the right ones. Like, I'm on board with like where she's trying to lead the country. I just, on that particular set of policies, I felt like she went a little bit, like, it was both over-inclusive and under-inclusive depending upon the nature of the problems you're trying to address. So if a penguin wants to grab the mic from Connor, I'm sure that the penguins can speak, because again, I'm pro-penguin around here. Anyone who gets friends together and then dresses up and shows that level of commitment deserves the microphone. Am I right?
Thank you, Mr. Yank. And we just flew in from the South Pole, and boy, are our arms tired. I'm Sid Barfoot. I'm with Bold, Iowa. So in the past, when asked about climate change, you've said that people with financial struggles have the attitude that the penguins can wait in line. Well, full disclosure, I'm not a penguin. I'm actually a person with financial struggles dressed as a penguin. Now, an extra $1,000 a month would be great. But in the meantime, we just found out last week that the second largest emperor penguin colony collapsed due to ice melt. And last year, 150,000 people were displaced by the deadliest wildfire in California's history. And just this year, thousands of people were displaced right here in the Midwest due to catastrophic flooding. So we've done the math, and neither people nor penguins have the time to wait in line while the next president spends political capital on something as ambitious as a universal basic income. So our question to you, Mr. Yank, is will you adjust your campaign and make avoiding climate catastrophe a priority, and so that both people and penguins can win?
Thank you for that. And 100% yes, climate change is an existential threat to our way of life, humans and penguins alike. And to the extent I ever suggested that I was not fully committed, then I conveyed the wrong message. Because to me, climate change, you know, I'm a parent, like, and I used to think we were shafting our grandkids. Now I think we're shafting ourselves and our kids. I mean, the last 4 years have been the 4 warmest years in recorded history. You don't need to be a genius or scientist to say, like, climate change is picking up. And you saw the floods here in Iowa and the Midwest. You see the forest fires and the changes around the world. So to the extent that I've said anything about like the fact that in a society where 78% of people are having trouble paying their bills and it's hard to galvanize energy around climate change, I still stand by that. Like if you go to someone and say, like we need to address climate change, they can't pay their bills, then they might look up at you and say the penguins can wait in line, like, you know, like I can't pay my bills. And so what we have to do is we have to get the economic boot off of people's throats. And then they're gonna hopefully realize that we need to address climate change. And this is the big thing, is that I've lived this in my career, and I really want you all to live this too. We can control our capital flows much more easily than we control just about anything else. Like if I'm elected president thanks to you all, this is not a far out policy at all. Like, so bear with me. So I become president in 2021, and then you know the entire reaction is gonna be like the anonymous Asian man who wants to give everyone money just became president. How did that happen? And then all the Democrats and progressives will be super psyched because they'll be like, oh, let's work with a new Democratic president who beat Donald Trump and get money to children and families. And then Republicans and conservatives are gonna look up and say, wait a minute, I kinda like this because this is money that's gonna go to rural areas and red states on the interior, and we do not need 80% of Congress to pass the dividend, we just need 51%. So let's say we get the dividend across the finish line, and then President Yang is gonna be like, all right, now climate change, and then we're gonna be able to accelerate progress towards climate change because those people that earlier could not focus on anything but paying their bills now have their heads up. And then when you say climate change is an existential threat, they'll look at their children and say, yes, it is. So this is just my choice of tactics, but we are 100% aligned on where we need to go. I'm for a carbon fee and dividend, I'm for rejoining the Paris Accords, I'm for clean air and water as actual measurements of the economy. So my description of the people that have this boot on their throats, that's not saying like, I think the penguins can wait. Like what I was saying is like, look, we have to be real. If Americans can't pay their bills, then like that's job number one for them and their families and their kids. But then we can move towards climate change as fast as possible. The brutal truth though is that America only accounts for 15% of global emissions. So even if we go whole hog and move towards renewables as fast as possible, we're probably only going to slow the rate of climate change incrementally. Even if we try and lead the world in the same direction. Unfortunately, the stuff that's making you very like depressed and like angry about the future of the global climate, it's happening. Like, you know, and even if we were to adopt very intelligent policies and get our share of global emissions down, the fact is a lot of the world is at a different point in their development cycle and they're just gonna keep on burning the cheapest forms of energy possible. So we should invest in trying to mitigate the worst effects of climate change because it is probably coming our way regardless of what sort of policies we adopt. I just want to thank you all though for your energy and commitment and passion. Like it's infectious, and you should know I am with you. Like I'm not running around as a climate change candidate, but I am running around as a science candidate. And if you believe in science, you know climate change is a major, major threat.
Hi, glad to have you back in Iowa this week. Thinking about housing affordability, rising housing prices are hurting the pocketbooks of Americans across this country, notably in San Francisco and New York, but also in our state. We have a great shortage of housing that's affordable, especially for people who make about $25,000 or less a year. I know that you have some policies out on your website regarding zoning, so would just like to learn a little bit more about your proposals for making housing more affordable in our state and across the country.
Thanks, it's a phenomenal question. It's something that's near and dear. So there are three things that are making Americans miserable right now, writ large, aside from climate change. It's housing, education, and healthcare. Because all three of those things have risen in cost at a much higher rate than our wages. Our wages have essentially been stagnant. Education's gotten 2.5 times more expensive. Healthcare has gotten, a similar level. Housing, not to the same extreme, but it's problematic. And the economic incentives around housing make it so that developers do not want to develop affordable housing. They want to try and gentrify things and make like the swankiest stuff that they can actually resell or rent, because that's where the money is. And so we have to provide real incentives to make affordable housing more available. But I would suggest that putting $1,000 a month into everyone's hands is a tremendous first step, because all of a sudden then the rent payments that are dragging people down now would be less burdensome, and you'd also make it so that that income's portable, so you can go with it anywhere, you can pool it. So if the 6 Penguins were to get together, you're all over 18, yes you are. So there'd be $6,000 a month, and among the 6 of them, they can afford a very nice habitat. So that like the $1,000 a month would go much further here in Iowa than it would in other parts of the country. And I've gotten complaints in other high-cost areas, like, why get $1,000 a month for everyone? Like, our cost of living is so much higher here than it is in other places. And I'm just like, look, $1,000 a month, like, it's fair, everyone understands it. Like, if you want, you could move someplace less expensive. Just because you live in a high-cost area, there are other reasons why you're doing that. You know, it's like it's not up to me to like try and make it. The other thing is, it's totally impractical to somehow tie it to where you live, because there'd be like a lot of games playing going on. So $1,000 a month is a much more powerful way for Iowans to be able to afford housing than it might be in other parts of the country.
Hi, my name is Michael. Me and my family came here from Morrison, and I wanted to ask, do you have any plans on improving school lunches?
That's a great question. So one of the things, it's Michael, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I've heard in rural communities around the country is that if your population shrinks, then a smaller number of households have to pay to afford the school. And so then the school budget goes down, and then I presume the lunches probably get a little bit less tasty too. And so what we have to do is we have to put money into the hands of the people, the homeowners in those communities, and then make it so that the tax base is strengthened. So that if you're in school there, then they're not cutting corners on things like your tater tots.
Michael, I want to talk to you about the 4th district a little bit. So we're the 2nd most agriculture producing district in America. And yet we only have 2 farm-to-table restaurants in the entire district. And so we grow all these things and we export them. And what we need to do, in getting back to the monopoly question, which is different in technology than it is in agriculture. In agriculture, we absolutely have to enforce our antitrust. And what we need to do is like what the beer industry, and you're a little young for that, but that's all right. So when I was your age, there was Bud, there was Miller, and there was Coors. And when we changed the policies, and now there's craft brews all over the state of Iowa and all over the United States. We need to do the same thing with agriculture, and then we can partner our pork producers with the local school, or in our local farmers with the local schools, and that's a solution to your problem.
Yes, JD. JD, oh, farm-to-table school lunches, I love it. That is what we need. That's vastly superior to anything I ate growing up. Yeah, come on.
Oh, thank you. It's my honor to ask you questions, Ms. Yang. And I am Chinese students study in the Drake University, and I am curious about how do you think of the trade war between China and the US, and what would you do if you become the president? Thank you.
So I've talked to many farmers here in Iowa who feel stabbed in the back by the trade war. You know, in many cases they supported Donald Trump, and then they said, I can't believe now these tariffs are making it much harder for me to sell my goods and maintain relationships abroad. There are real problems and imbalances in the US-China trade relationship, particularly their theft of intellectual property. But the trade war to me was the wrong approach, because the trade war ended up causing problems on both sides of the border. It caused the zero-sum game where really neither American farmers or businessmen are winning, or people on the other side. And as someone who's run a business, I would be furious if I had made investments and planned months or years in advance, and then you change the prices on me. Or I talked to a farmer yesterday who spent years building up a relationship, and now that relationship is gone, and he's like, I'm not sure we're ever gonna get it back, and it took me 6 years to build that relationship, I would be furious. And so I am not the type that would change the rules on people that had been trying to make their farms or businesses more successful or internationally competitive. And if I were to try and do something like a tariff, I would literally give people like 3 years notice so that you don't have the rug pulled out from under you and that everyone can make adequate plans. But that would not be something I would be for in most any circumstance, because there are other ways, in my opinion, to address the imbalances. I will say that many Americans have problems with our current trade relationships because they feel like we're getting a raw deal. And in some cases we are. And that the goal has to be that to the extent that America's winning from trade, that Americans actually feel like we're participating in those winnings. And it's not just that a few companies are getting rich while Americans are losing on the other end.
Hello, thank you for taking our questions. Do you think it's beneficial to give the dividend, the freedom dividend, to people over a certain income, such as millionaires and billionaires, since they're not gonna spend that money?
Well, so this is the fun part. Let's use Jeff Bezos as an example, because he's literally, one of the richest Americans. He's worth 160 billion. I think it's down to 80 billion. So that's a divorce joke. It's still a lot of money. So we're going to extract billions of dollars from Jeff because he's the biggest shareholder of this $1 trillion tech company that we're then going to be extracting, tens, hundreds of billions. We're going to be getting billions of dollars from Jeff. So then if we send him $1,000 a month just to remind him he's an American, it's fine. You know what I mean? But there are real values to universalizing it. And Alaska proves this. So number one is you destigmatize it. It's not like some people get it and other people don't. Number two, it's not seen as a rich to poor transfer. It's not like I'm giving it to you, you're getting it from me. Number three, you get rid of any incentives to somehow underreport your income or to have to monitor people. You just don't care. You're like, you're an American, you're a citizen, here's $1,000. And this is why it's so universally popular in Alaska, because they're not means testing it there. They're just like, you're an Alaskan, here's your $2,000. And that's one reason why it's been so successful and it stood the test of time for almost 40 years through many, many different administrations, is that if someone else is getting it, then it's easier to attack it. But if we're all getting it, it's very, very hard to attack.
Hi, Mr. Yang. So I'm a current student at Roosevelt High School just down the street. Go Rough Riders. I was engaged in several walkouts last year, and many were even to the Capitol protesting gun violence within schools, which gained attention of not only the state legislature, but also nationwide across the country. And I think that is a very important issue. Something that I am struggling with is that I am currently 16 and cannot vote in 2020 because I am 25 days off the deadline. Yeah. Now, you support having 16-year-olds vote, and I was wondering, because I count for 0 Californians, how can you make it, or how would you get the support from other Democrats, Republicans within Congress, or even other people fighting for the nomination to allow or to be in favor of 16-year-olds voting?
Thanks, it's a great question. I recently came out in favor of having the voting age go from 18 to 16. And there were a number of reasons. I actually got some controversy and pushback around that. But I'm convinced it's the right move, in part because imagine what it would do to our high schools, political culture. If the juniors and seniors in high school could actually vote, then it goes from being something that's somewhat not personal or relevant to all of a sudden it's like, who are you going to vote for? And the studies have shown that the earlier someone votes, the more likely they are to become a lifetime voter. So lowering the voting age would be transformative. Now, some of the pushback I've gotten was like, well, 16-year-olds don't know anything about politics. And what I responded to that is like, it's not like we're giving people a pop quiz when they show up at the ballot box. You know, there are probably people making votes right now that are not exactly like, reading Politico every day or something. I think Politico's in the room. Sorry, Politico. So to the question of how we can get people on board with that, a friend of mine actually proposed it in Congress and got about 100 supporters in Congress, which is not enough to pass it. But I'm convinced that if we keep pushing, that we can convince Americans that it's the right move. And to me, it's a moral issue because frankly, you're gonna be here longer than I will. And so if you're going to be here longer, you should have a say in what's going on in our country. And it shouldn't be that you feel like your voice doesn't count at the stage you're at. And to the issue you are passionate about on gun control, I couldn't agree more. Where to me as a parent, like it's crazy to me that students are coming to schools and are actually concerned about being caught in a shooting and having drills to protect themselves. And so I'm for common sense gun legislation to try and make it harder for Americans to get access to deadly firearms. But I'm also for a massive mental health initiative, which is very much tied together. My brother is a clinical psychologist, and I know that there is so much more we can do. And so investing in mental health is one way that we can help address the violence. And one thing I've already committed to is I'm gonna have a psychologist in the White House. I thought that was a good idea even before this administration. But we can destigmatize the mental health issues that frankly, like we all struggle with. And there is a mental health crisis in this country among young people in particular, really among all Americans. Because if you look at the rates of anxiety and depression and the stress levels, like we are more stressed out than just about any other advanced country at this point. It's one reason I'm so passionate about the fact that we need to humanize our economy as fast as possible and get you the right to vote, man.
All right, I believe we have time for one last question, so I'll pass it here.
Hey, I'm Nick. I actually came up from Kansas City as well to come see this. So,
I love you guys. I did not mean to. I mean, anyone who drove a long distance to be here, you guys are awesome.
So in my case, I've been working in call centers for past decade, more because entry level, decent pay, and really couldn't get anything else. My main question is actually more tied to the Medicare for All issue, though, since part of what I was working for was the Medicare and health insurance marketplace call centers. I've had numerous, just countless calls from people who, okay, even with basic Medicare as is, you still have the issue of it covers 80%, but then the remaining 20% you're stuck with. So even taking a past bill that I've had to deal with, the base price on it was $138,000. Even with the base 80% covered, I'd still be looking at about 25 grand, and I'd still be paying that off. And okay, you could get another plan to cover the remaining 20%, but that's still another $500+ a month usually. So even taking into account that and the list of exclusions a lot of plans will have, what's your plan for trying to make it so that even going for Medicare for All, making it so that the bill still doesn't pretty much financially ruin someone if they get caught in that kind of accident or some kind of situation like cancer or anything else that's gonna just leave them hospitalized for who knows how long?
Thank you. It's a great question. My parents retired to another country a number of years ago. They bounce back and forth because I have I have kids, so they want to visit their grandkids, so they hear a lot too. But when they went into the hospital in Asia, they were blown away by how fast and easy and inexpensive it was. They were literally just like, what? Like, is that it? And then they just gave them like a $50 copay for like significant procedures too. And then they came back to this country and they're like, what is going on with the American healthcare system? We've essentially been shell-shocked by our own system for so long, where if you say something like it cost $58,000 to do something, like we all know those horror stories all too well. There are a lot of costs that are baked into our system that are not real. And you know this because a lot of the hospital pricing, it's all over the map. Like the same thing can cost something totally different in one county versus another. It can cost something totally different from one patient to another in the same hospital. There's a lot of fabrication going on and a lot of sticker shock. And when you dig in, you find that the true costs of a lot of this stuff are much lower than we're paying. And there's no clearer example of that than prescription drugs. Where if you look at the prescription drugs, again, the prices are like completely arbitrary and all over the map. So one of the things I proposed, which, like, one, Medicare has to be able to negotiate drug prices. That would bring the cost down for Americans very, very quickly. Two, we should say to all the drug companies, we need to be paying no more than the average of what you're charging other countries, because they're in the habit of gouging us relative to other countries, because the other countries are too smart to pay extortionate rates, but we're not smart enough. So they're like, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna like charge everyone else like stuff where we can make money at normal rate, and then Americans is up here. So there are ways we can get the cost down. I'm confident of it in large part because other countries have done at least some versions of it, and I've looked at the numbers. I have a friend who's an investor in that space, and she tells me that she has never seen profiteering at this scale in her entire career. She's like, looks at some of the drug companies and the device companies and the service providers and is like, their numbers make no sense. And she said that they make so little sense that she's now shorting those companies or betting against them. And then she supported my campaign for president so I can clean it up. And that's what I'm gonna do.